All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation from the Campbell Webinar Series. Today's session is Information Retrieval for Evidence Synthesis, how researchers in limited resource environments can do comprehensive searches. My name is Peter Johnson, and I am the Health Sciences Liaison Librarian for the University of Kansas Medical Center School of Medicine. I will be presenting the introduction this morning. Today's presentation will begin after presenter introductions. We'll reserve 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the hour for questions, so feel free to share your questions on the presentation in the session's chat throughout the presentation, or you can save them till the end and we'll go through them then. So now for the introductions. Our two presenters this morning are Kate Nyhan and Cozette Comer. Kate Nyhan is a research and education librarian for public health at Cushing-Whitney Medical Library at Yale University and a lecturer in environmental health sciences at Yale School of Public Health. As an information expert, she contributes to evidence synthesis and meta-research projects. Her research interests include the use of evidence in languages other than English in evidence synthesis, the information behavior of the public health workforce, and research waste. Kate is on social media at Mastodon at kdnyhan at social.esmarconf.org, and we'll put that link in the chat as well. Cozette Comer is the Evidence Synthesis Services Coordinator at the University Libraries at Virginia Tech. In this position, she provides educational opportunities for and partners with faculty and students in their application of synthesis methods such as scoping or mapping reviews, systematic reviews, and meta-analyses. She's also a part-time PhD student in public administration and public affairs, exploring the role of synthesis methods in the translation of research to policy. That said and done, all right, Kate and Cozette, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today for this session on information retrieval for evidence synthesis, how researchers in limited resource environments can do comprehensive searches. You'll notice at the bottom of the next few slides, we've got that tiny URL in case you missed it in the chat, and we'll probably go ahead and add that back to the chat as well for your reference later on and today. Thank you so much, Peter, for that great introduction. I am Cozette.
And I'm Kate.
And we're also want to give a special thanks to Ryan, who is not able to join us today, but will join us for a second information retrieval based session in July. Ryan also helped us with these slides. So just to recap some technical notes, again, this session is being recorded and it will be posted on the sites linked and described here. If you have questions, or I've also seen some folks introducing themselves in the chat, and I highly encourage that as well, please use the chat box. You can ask questions at any time, but please know also there will be time for a Q&A and discussion towards the end of the session. We have some learning objectives today. The first one is that we hope you'll be able to leave here and identify approaches for finding and identifying key characteristics for selecting resources for evidence synthesis searches in low resource contexts. We also want you to be able to list advantages and disadvantages of free databases for evidence synthesis, be able to modify syntax from paywall database searches from published literature or from hedges to implement in free databases. And finally, be able to identify pathways to accessing full text. So with that, we do have the following agenda in mind. It mirrors pretty much exactly those learning objectives, so I won't go through it word for word. But I'll just bring your attention to the end. Kate and I had a lot of content in here that we ended up wanting to spend a little bit less time on, just because it is a great opportunity for a great set of resources for you to use as you're moving forward with your own reviews. So that's going to be in the final section, resources for later. With that, let's do a little background why we're doing this, why we're presenting on this topic. So I don't think I probably have to tell this audience, but we will anyway, just to cover our bases. Evidence synthesis methods are popular. and they are rapidly being adopted across disciplines, across contexts, and across geographic boundaries. And with this in mind, we really need to make sure that perspectives from low and mid-income countries and low resource settings are included as we develop this field. And this includes perspectives of authors who are conducting syntheses, authors who are conducting primary studies that might be synthesized, and users of the syntheses themselves. And so one of the common themes we know is that access to sources is an issue. And so on the next slide, we refer to this project that was conducted by Sarah Young in 2018 as part of the MLA Hinari Research for Life grant. She provided a short course in Tanzania in 2018, and as part of this exercise found 3 of the issues were access to full text articles, access to expertise and review methods and meta-analyses, and general lack of time. So we have ways to address and solve the first issue, and that's really what we're going to focus on in the conversation today. But we also just want to briefly address the other 2 issues here. Access to expertise and review methods and meta-analyses. Well, by getting involved in the Campbell session today, you are part of a community, and we are going to reference communities like this one, the Campbell collaboration, that is here to support your review journey. And then with regard to the last item, search with the right blend of sensitivity and specificity means that you're not necessarily wasting time. So yes, they do take a lot of time to do these types of reviews, but if you use your search hedges and you use material that is available to you to design that search in an efficient manner, you can reduce some of that time constraint. So without further ado, let's get started with the content. Finding free sources of evidence for your evidence synthesis project. So as I mentioned, you are part. I apologize, Kate. I put a lot of links into Kate's handling the slide clicks, so thank you. So the Campbell collaboration and authors who are associated with them will put out these resources for to present online databases that are relevant to the search process. For example, this 2014 document that is looking specifically at systematic reviews done on topics related to international development highlights a bunch of really great key online databases. And they actually color code it in there for free and pay-based. So lots of great free resources there. And then there's also this 2017 article, and be careful where you click. Okay, good. There's also this 2017 article that's for more general purpose, not specific to a discipline, also published by the Campbell Collaboration Systematic Review Journal, that has some, but maybe not as many free resources listed in this publication. And so this is just kind of a starting space for you. In the next slide, before we go too far into how we're identifying different sources, we want to help to conceptualize what the review process or the systematic searching process really looks like. So we do this by characterizing it as primary versus secondary search approaches. In the primary search approach, you're really establishing the bulk of your corpus. This is actually probably what you're thinking when you think of a systematic review search or a scoping review search. At this stage, your search strategy, or the words you use in what order and how they're joined together, that's going to need to be relatively consistent across all of the sources that you use in your primary search approach. In this stage, you also want everything to be reported and documented transparently, such that it could be replicated by you in the future or by another team. Again, when you're thinking about this, these are the searches in academic journal databases and similar repositories that make up the bulk of your search. The secondary search strategies are those that kind of complement and supplement the primary searches. These are very seldom going to be replicable, but they are really important because they can help to decrease the likelihood of missing relevant material. In other words, increase the likelihood that you are being comprehensive. So when you think of secondary search strategies, you might think of hand searching specific websites or specific organizational documents, maybe specific publishers that for one reason or another are not indexed in the site in the broader primary searching databases that you have selected and access to. You might also think about citation chasing. Sorry. You might also think about citation chasing. We're not going to go into detail on that, but if you do want to learn more about that, there's resources in the Campbell collaborations guidelines, Cochrane collaborations guidelines, and there is a great tool to support your citation chasing linked here. This also might look like reaching out to listservs and experts in the field directly. Now we're going to conceptualize this another way, let's look at the Prisma flow diagram. For those who might not be familiar, Prisma flow diagram is simply illustrating the flow of your articles from when you do your comprehensive search all the way through to that selection of your included materials. In other words, your title and abstract screening and your full text review. On the first side, we see the primary search strategy. This first side on the left is really representing your primary research strategy. On the second side, we're seeing the secondary research strategies. So we can see on that first side, we're really getting stuff from databases. On the second side, we're getting things from websites, organizations, etc. So with those things in mind, there are some characteristics that you'll want to take into consideration as you are deciding where to look. In general, you'll want to consider the disciplinary coverage, the geographic coverage. You'll also want to consider the types of documents that are available in your sources that you're considering. But these are really general, and they will depend on your research question and the scope of your review. So think about other characteristics that are important for answering your research question. But you should also think about whether you want to treat a source as a primary source or, a source in the primary search strategy or a source in the secondary search strategy. And to do this, you might consider whether you can search the interface with a fair amount of complexity. So some search strategies can be relatively simple. Maybe you use and or Boolean operators, and that's kind of the extent. Some searches can be a little bit more complex. Maybe it's necessary for you to have proximity operators or adjacency operators in there. And so we just want to make sure that whatever source that you're using is appropriately able to handle the complexity of your search. You also want to make sure that the search is likely to be able to be replicated. So especially if there's some kind of algorithm in the background that is maybe sifting through a larger corpus and just deciding somewhat randomly, not based on search terms you're using, maybe based on the amount of citations an article has to present that one versus another set of articles. That would be a concern with regard to replicability. And finally, you want to consider whether you can bulk download the citations from the article or from the database. It can be very time consuming and an unreasonable ask to have somebody download manually one by one 1,000 records from a database, for example. So on the next two slides, we do have some comparative lists. We're not going to go over them right now. This is for your reference later on, a place to start. On this slide, we've got some sources that you could start with for your primary searches. And then on this next slide, we've got some sources for your secondary searches. But let's move forward from there for time's sake. So on this slide, we do want to highlight the Research for Life group. Research for Life provides institutions with low and middle income countries with online access to academic and professional peer-reviewed content. They have 5 different databases that are available based on different disciplinary scopes. You can see them all on the screen. Our main message here is that we want you to know your institution might have access to this if you weren't already aware that it does. And if your institution does not have access, they might actually be eligible. So we've linked to the eligibility criteria for an institution to get access to Research for Life. We also want to bring your attention to the fact that there are topic-focused lists of sources that are developed, particularly by collaborations, for example, like the Cochrane collaboration, like the Campbell collaboration, or in this case, the Epicenter. They have created this crowdsourced list of information resources relating to low resource settings. And I'll mention that the Campbell Collaboration's 2014 article that we started this conversation with is also housed here. So as you're looking for resources, you might want to consider looking at those collaborations that already exist. You might also consider targeting document types. We mentioned that in one of the considerations as well. This would really be more of a secondary approach, but you want to consider, are there specific types of documents that you'd like to include? You may also find some of these resources in the primary search approach too, but if they're very important to your research question, it would be important to target these directly. So you might consider, for example, think tank publications. You might also consider government and legal documents. And sometimes these will occur in the same space. Sometimes these will be accessible via the same resource. There are other types of information like data and data sets. You might also consider theses or dissertations, and you might consider preprints. Now, these are not the exhaustive list or representation of everything out there by a high magnitude. There's a lot out there. So on the next slide, for these particular references, we did the same comparison, again, just as a jumping off point for your consideration in the future. And then on the next slide, we'll go into advantages and disadvantages, and I'm going to pass it off to Kate.
Thank you. So we want to be really forthright and transparent about why we sometimes use these free databases and why sometimes we wish they were even better than they are. So some of the advantages we want to highlight. If you're used to searching in databases like PubMed, you're used to searching without access to the full text of the documents that of the relevant documents that you're trying to find. But some free databases do have some amount of free full text searching because they're part of the larger open access, open science ecosystem. This is especially useful if you're interested in a population subgroup or a secondary outcome, something that might be mentioned in the paper's methods or results section without being mentioned in the paper's title or abstract. Reproducibility is another great feature of free databases for two aspects. First of all, they're accessible to everyone who's on the internet. So everybody can take your thoroughly documented searches and reproduce them. And these free databases with no complicated licenses that have to be negotiated by different institutions, they may actually have a higher consistency in the sense that with a free database that's the same for everyone to access with no access tiers, everybody's version of that resource is the same, unlike with some paid resources. Finally, there is a great deal of content, indeed sometimes more content than in licensed resources, and not just more content, but more content from LMICs. And in this case, I'm not saying, strictly speaking, more articles about low and middle income countries. Rather, I'm saying that there's empirical evidence that there is more content from journals that are based in low and middle income countries in the open science resource OpenAlex, which is included in the free database lens, than there is in some of the frequently used paywalled databases. Now, it's not all roses. There are some disadvantages too. First of all, often your readers, including your earliest readers, your peer reviewers, are unfamiliar with free databases. So you'll have to explain the scope and the features and why you decided to use this particular set of databases. And the justification, well, it was free. Well, I could access it. Well, I didn't have any other choice. From the peer reviewer's perspective, that's not a very persuasive justification. So you want to think about the characteristics that Cozette was discussing in some of the earlier slides when you make the case that your choice of several databases to search in your evidence synthesis project is justifiable. Anytime you work with a new database or platform, there's new syntax to learn. And some of these free resources are so new that their interface changes. It feels like it changes pretty frequently, right? When PubMed changes, there's Sturm und Drang for years as librarians get used to the adjustments. So learning some new syntax, it's good for you. It keeps your brain flexible. Then starting to think about data quality issues. Sometimes there might be metadata missing in the bibliographic records or some subgroup of the bibliographic records in a free resource. That could be the case in paywalled resources too, but it is really important to get to know a resource you're using as part of your evidence synthesis project. And it's pretty common that in free databases, less of the content has human curated subject indexing or human applied controlled vocabulary terms. Now, these can present issues. You want to be thoughtful about how you handle them. But in my view, these disadvantages do not outweigh the advantages that we saw on the previous slide. So let's say that you want to modify some searches and use them in some of these free databases that we're recommending. Well, folks, I'm really lazy. I don't want to start from the beginning if I don't have to. So I like to approach this task of evidence synthesis searching in a modular fashion. And if I want to write a new systematic review about this topic, religiosity in older adults in the Middle East and North Africa, I could use parts of the search strategies from 3 papers I've worked on before. I could start with the religiosity and spirituality search terms from this HOPE paper, a systematic review of religion and health in a particular population. To that, I could add search terms for the MENA setting from the Abood paper. And I'll add a third concept, the older adult population, using a search strategy from this preprint about older adults' health during pandemics. So if you're going to modify these searches or hedges that you see available in the literature that were designed for paywalled databases, and you want to change them, adjust them, translate them to use in free databases, you're going to need to understand the original search and the original database, and for that matter, the new database very well. Now, in this section, we're going to call the original databases DB0 and the new databases DB1. When I say keywords, I'm talking about natural language searching. And when I say controlled vocabulary, I'm talking about subject indexing. And the examples come from this existing paper about Campbell searching. So there's a lot of small details, tiddly little things that you should pay attention to. Sometimes capitalization is important. Is the operator exactly the same? Does the shape or encoding of the quotation marks matter? If the original search relied on the order of operations that a particular database uses to control the order of operations, don't rely on that in your translation. Instead, force the order of operations that is logically correct, the way to combine the Boolean operators with nested parentheses. You may have to change symbols for adjacency and truncation and wildcards. And the command that you achieve with adjacency 2 in one database might actually be achieved by adjacency 3 in another, depending on how exactly it works. If the original search was created taking advantage of a database's built-in features for lemmatization or stemming, that is looking at alternative word forms implicitly, do you need to account for that when you make a translation? So these are some of the factors to think about, even though punctuation, such a tiny detail, but it can impact the results of your search. Now, do you have to translate everything by hand? Not necessarily. You can get help from these automated tools, but I called it semi-automated because you'd still need to check the output. And some of these tools might be optimized to produce output for multiple paywalled databases instead of free databases. Maybe we should all write to our friends who run the Polyglot Search Translator and suggest some that they also have output styled for some free databases. Now, I want to go over the translation of field tags in particular, using this example from the Campbell searching paper, focusing on these keywords that they mentioned using for the idea of parental involvement. Some thoughts to keep in mind. The original search might have searched the title of the abstract, both of them, maybe author keywords too, maybe some subject headings, occasionally full text. The field tags may need to be applied to each term, or it may be possible to apply the field tags across a whole chunk of terms at the same time, save some characters, save some proofreading. It may be possible to search exactly the same fields. It may be possible, but a bad idea to search exactly the same fields. And here's the reason why. These matching field tags might not actually match when you look at the implementation. For example, in Lens, very big free database with great coverage of LMIC content, but weird characteristic. The text of the abstract index that's available to be searched in that database is truncated sometimes. And so if the keyword you're looking for is in the second half of the abstract and you search the Lens abstract index, you're not going to get some of the papers that you actually want to retrieve if you keep searching that abstract index. Then there's the issue of exactly what a keyword search covers. Does it just include title terms and abstract terms, or does it also have some controlled vocabulary terms that you're relying on? So to put all this into practice, if I were taking the parental involvement keyword search and translating it to search in Lens, folks, I just reran these numbers today. So these results are current as of this morning. If I look for this quoted phrase in the title field in Lens with or without the lens stemming feature turned on, I get 2,000 results and change, depending on whether I allow the database to use or turn off its stemming feature. But I don't want to rely totally on the stemming feature, because I got to know the database, and I recognize that, especially in quoted phrases, the stemming feature is insufficient. So I decide to account for some of the variations manually that you see in the original version were handled with truncation internal to the phrase, this asterisk after parent before involvement. So I'll try parent involvement, parental involvement with the adjective parents involvement. The database doesn't pay attention to punctuation, so I don't need to worry about the singular possessive form or the plural possessive form as long as I have this S here. And you can see that although I'm still searching in the title index, I get a lot more records as a result. And then in our next two lines, we're going beyond just the title index. We're trying title or abstract. And then at the very bottom, title or abstract or full text to the extent that the information resource can legally access the full text of those papers. And so the most comprehensive, the most sensitive version of a query for this one concept, parental involvement, it's a lot of characters. And this search results set, 23,000 documents. Of course, as people who think a lot about searching, you're aware that I'm not going to screen all 23,000 documents. I'm going to combine my search with some other elements. Now, I want to point out that back in the original ideas here, they were also interested in searching for the keywords parental practices and parental behaviors. So far, I've only translated that one phrase, parental involvement. There's going to be a very long search, but it's long, it's fiddly, but you can do it, right? Just sit down and start typing and keep good notes. Now, handling controlled vocabulary can be an issue in these translations. Sometimes you need to switch the controlled vocabulary between two different ontologies. Sometimes you can use the same controlled vocabulary, but you can't rely on an explosion feature. You have to do it all by hand and include explicitly each of the narrower terms. And sometimes the relevant controlled vocabulary idea that you'd like to search for is just not present in the target database. Maybe because the target database has no controlled vocabulary, or maybe because the target database has controlled vocabulary, but doesn't include that particular idea in their ontology. So there's two options. You could decide to use a keyword search for that concept, or you could leave that concept out and apply it as a screening criterion instead of a searching criterion. And here's an example. For the concept of the age group of up to 12 years old, which was the inclusion criteria for this example, in the paywall database PsycInfo, there's very reliable, relatively reliable, very granular age, population age indexing. But if I wanted to translate this to a database where I don't have that kind of granular age group subject indexing, in that case, I would search for the concept of children using multiple word forms and synonyms. And then I wouldn't even try to search for the specific 12 and under age group. Instead, I would screen, well, my collaborators would screen for that specific age group in the title abstract screening stage, and if necessary, in the full text screening stage. On the other hand, the descriptors or subject headings for parental involvement or academic performance that are also visible in this example, those concepts, I'd be comfortable searching for using keyword searching in pretty much any bibliographic database. Now, filters can be a challenge because they rely heavily on database specific metadata. For example, the human check tag that you might see in PubMed, there's no real equivalent in many other free databases to use. Now, when you are translating a search, please evaluate the search that you're using as raw material first. Some papers that you can use for guidance about that are given here. And here are places where you can find these searches so that you can use them as input for your translation process. And I want to highlight that the Campbell Systematic Reviews Journal, Search Archive, and the ISSG Search Filters resource are all always free. Of course, the paper that you learn about through the ISSG Search Filters resource, that may not be free, but at least you'll be able to get started looking for searches to translate in these sources. Now, do you have to translate exactly? No, it's okay to change, but you should change for a reason, right? Sometimes there's judgment calls, and sometimes you'll have to defend those judgment calls. Finally, make a point of citing the papers whose search strategies you use, even if you edited them, and explain the translation process when you report your search. And of course, for all the details and guidance about reporting your search, the Prisma S guideline linked down here, read that and then you'll know everything you need to know. So now we've talked about how you can search. You'll have your collaborators and yourself maybe do some screening, and now you need to access the full text, and Cozette has you covered.
Yes, thank you, Kate. So we're going to talk a little bit about finding and managing full text. And so we're going to start with that managing piece a little and talk about citation managers. Kate and I talked about a few different free citation managers, so we want to note that there are other options out there, but between the two of us, our preference lies consistently in Zotero. And I can say I use Zotero almost exclusively, even though I have institutional access to other types of citation managers. So Zotero is really great for a lot of reasons. Thank you. So it's free for everyone. It is free. It's been free for a while too. And you can actually purchase additional storage if need be down the road. So it allows users to import many citations at once. And it also allows the retrieval of some PDFs without library access. So I would recommend starting with your citation manager as a space to more quickly gather the PDFs, the full text for your citation list before you start digging manually elsewhere. If you do have an institutional affiliation that has institutional access, you can also link Zotero to that institutional access to gather those resources as well. This is not going to find every PDF on your list, but it is a really great place to start because it's just a click of a few buttons. Some of the key features for the citation manager include tagging and notes. It also includes sophisticated folder and sorting options. You can automatically identify duplicates and go through them manually here. And one of my favorite features is that it's connected to Retraction Watch, the website Retraction Watch, and it'll automatically identify retracted papers when you upload them into your citation manager, Zotero. This is available both as a web browser and as a downloadable desktop software. And it's a really great tool for sharing and collaborating as well. If you want to get started, we're not going to teach you how to do that today, but there is a link on this slide. So when we're looking for free full text, one of the first places that we might start is the actual database itself. For example, Kate's talked about PubMed and Lens, so we'll stick with those examples. But there are some caveats here. PubMed's free full text filter relies only on 2 data sources. That is the publishers telling the National Libraries of Medicine about free full text availability and the NIH public access policy compliance. So this is not going to gather all of your, this is not a space where you can collect all of your PDFs. This is not a space where you can collect all of the full text. It's not comprehensive. Lens, on the other hand, does get sources, does get full text from a number of sources. So it's more comprehensive, but it's still not going to be 100%. So the takeaway message here, again, another great place to look. If you can't find full text in one database, try another one. You might also consider searching institutional repositories or personal websites of the authors of the text that you're looking for, but we would recommend efficiency over more granular approaches like that. So searching the web, for example, Google or Google Scholar with browser plugins is a really great way to search efficiently. We note here, and then also on the slide that contains the links for this, for these tools, that plugins are also called add-ons or extensions, in case you see that terminology. So some of our favorite plugins are Unpaywall, Open Access button, and the Google Scholar button. And again, we'll have links at the bottom of this slide deck for you to get started with those. And then one more alternative might be to reach out to people directly. Contact the author. People are usually delighted that readers are interested, and being included in a systematic review or a mapping or a scoping review is really cool. So one approach might be to use their built-in features in Open Access button plugin. Or you might look up the author's information manually and write a personal email. This is also just a great opportunity to build up your network. So we've got, as I've mentioned, and Katie's mentioned a few times, we have a few slides here that are resources for later. And so, for example, finding free sources for your review, some additional places to get started, where to look for full text, additional places to consider. These are the plugin links to get started there. And then also want to highlight the SR Toolbox, which is a great place. We haven't talked about like systematic review software, but there is systematic review software that can help to structure your actual title and abstract screening, full text review, data extraction, and there actually are a good amount of free sources out there.
And speaking of free resources, on behalf of Cozette, want to thank everyone who helped us prepare and deliver this webinar for free as a mitzvah for the world. Dana Huff helped us with graphic design of the slide deck. Yashika Murley and Trisha Young from the Campbell collaboration handled all the logistics and a great marketing campaign. And our librarian colleagues, Sarah Young, Ryan Splenda, Peter Johnson, our moderator, all helped bring this together too. And last thank you for coming, and thanks in advance for the questions and discussion that I hope we'll have for the next 13 minutes.
Excellent. We have some time for questions. If you've been saving them up eagerly for the end of the presentation, feel free to share them in the chat. Robin notes that in addition to the research mentioned, ResearchGate can also be useful. even if not released, there are some authors who will be contactable through that option. Oh, let's see, we have one from Robin. Are you happy to for me to share your slides with colleagues?
I would be thrilled with that. Right, Kate? Perfect.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see, we have a few come in now. Adna says, I've tried approaching authors to ask for copies of articles that were behind paywall, and unfortunately, I never got a positive reply. I also expected authors to be happy to hear that people want to read their work. So, and that's actually was going to be my question. How do you approach authors about sharing their work with a cold call or cold email, as it were?
Well, I'd like to ask this commenter a follow-up question. Do you recall, was the result that you sent an email to the corresponding author and maybe you got an error message that their that email account is no longer at this institution? Was it a problem about trying to get in touch with the right person? Or was it an issue about people did not reply because they were too busy, or an issue that they said, oh, I could share, but I'm not going to because I don't like you?
Yeah, hi. No, I'm happy to expand on it because I used to be an academic and I work in public health for like a local health board in the UK. And then basically, I didn't get anything back. So I don't know. And I spent about a week where I probably sent between, I don't know, 10 to 15 emails, like different authors, like a very specific search. I was carrying it out, and I thought at least some of them will reply, or I'll get some like email, not correct, but I basically didn't see anything. So I'm just wondering, maybe my email went to spam. But I don't know. I was just like really surprised because for me, being an academic beforehand, I also received emails asking for free text. And I would always, I had this attitude of like, yes, please have this, copy of a PDF. I'm happy to share it.
And
maybe
that sounds like it was a pretty big set, right? You tried this for, you said 10, 15 articles.
Yeah, probably between 10 to 15 articles, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a possible explanation that puts academics in a pretty bad light. And it's based on my experience. So I work at Yale. Yale is a pretty big brand name. So when I write, or when even students from Yale write to people, if we can track down an email that they actually read, we generally get a pretty good response rate from people when we're saying, can you please share your article? Or when we're saying, can you please share a little extra information about your article because your article wasn't very well reported? That's exactly. A subtext. We don't write the subtext out quite the way I just said it. And even sometimes for a really hard to find, but exciting, we think it's going to be really useful document, I've more than once written to not the author, but the last person I can find who cited a document. Say, this is just really hard to find great literature report. And generally, they write back. So I'm wondering,
that was my follow-up thing, but I never really, it's on my list.
Yeah, I think that it might be a situation where people who should be treating your inquiries with just as much respect coming from the public health workforce as they would treat an inquiry coming from a big research university. I wonder if there's a prestige issue there.
Yeah, it could be.
It would be a fascinating thing to study, actually.
Yeah, it really would be. I would second. I've heard from faculty who are pretty well known. Sally Morton, for example, used to work at Virginia Tech for a while, and she literally wrote a book on comparative effectiveness reviews. And in one of her sessions, she mentioned that most often she actually just doesn't get a response when she reaches out to authors. So I do think there is probably some kind of prestige effect here. I've had success, certainly. I've never gotten a negative I've never gotten anybody who's upset or anything like that. But
no, I would not expect to be basically told no, pay like whatever nature a lot of money to get access to it, because that's the fair way to do it. It was just silence. I was just wondering, basically. Yeah, it was good to have a little chat and yeah, some extra.
Yes, and I see some interesting discussion in the comments about this branding and prestige. That's fascinating. And then another question about approaching people. I think that if you explain why you are so excited about reading their work, that's good. If you there's also the judgment call. Do I want to just ask them to send it to me? Or do I want to encourage them to self-archive their accepted manuscript so that the next person doesn't have to email them in particular? It'll just be available to anyone who uses Unpaywall or anyone who uses the open access button. In that case, for librarians, if the person I'm contacting is a librarian, I might mention a resource like Share Your Paper, which makes it very easy to legally self-archive in a way that's going to be discoverable in the browser plugins. But for people who are not librarians, I would just ask for the paper, and I wouldn't sort of do that extra bit of education about self-archiving and green open access.
We have another question from Jen. One of the reasons I like to search in PubMed instead of Ovid Medline / other Medline databases is because anyone can search PubMed for free. So I feel this enhances reproducibility. Given the Cochrane primary 3 databases, PubMed, Embase, and Cochrane, are there ideal equivalents you would recommend? I assume that would be freely accessible.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a like for like substitution, but I would encourage everyone to look into the free resource Lens that was used in some of our examples. You heard me talking up its inclusion of material from journals in low and middle income countries. And they have a very responsive help team. So when a search query is not behaving in the way you expected, you can find out why and what change you need to make. So I think that, and that does have the same characteristic that you highlight about PubMed, that it's free, that anyone who wants to search it can search it. So I would recommend that just because it contains so much. It has rich metadata and it has good support. But I wonder if Cozette would have a comment on this question too.
Yeah, I wanted you to go first here because you have much more familiarity with the health-focused databases as a whole. But I also would have recommended Lens. I'll mention that Lens is the primary repository for the citation chaser tool that we had mentioned earlier. So it is a pretty standard general purpose open free repository. So I would definitely say that's a good starting space.
And if you wanted to think about comparisons, I think of Lens as a sort of use this, not that, in relation to Scopus or Web of Science Core Collection. Similar characteristics, they don't provide their own manual subject indexing, but they do have this nice citation graph. If you are especially interested in clinical trials, which I'm guessing with the Cochrane context, then you might want to look at Dimensions, which has a free version as well as its paid version. And they have a sort of network graph with information about clinical trials registrations in addition to papers and also grants too. So that could be useful for people who are especially focused on clinical medicine.
Actually, Kate, I'm gonna double down on that one. I'm glad you brought up Dimensions. Dimensions also has policy documents. I think you mentioned grants and patent documents in there. So it's, I would say, another very general purpose as far as disciplines are concerned. It's got some wide applicability, and you can do a lot of great things with their bibliometrics in there. So I'm not sure, Jen, if that was the answer you were looking for. As Kate said, I don't think that there's a one-to-one really alternative for the databases that Cochrane recommends, but you can kind of softly sort of approach that.
We have several questions in the chat. We are at the top of the hour and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I think unfortunately we'll have to move along, but we will save the chat transcript for those who didn't get their questions answered. If you want to leave your email within the chat, if you feel comfortable, or you of course have the presenter's email through the slide deck as well, if you want to email those directly.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from people.
Oh.
Me too. Yeah, we're happy to continue this conversation.
Thank you all for attending today, those who attended live and those who are viewing the recording now. The next session within the Cochrane series will be occurring on July the 11th. So thank you all for attending today. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and hope to see you next time.